Hello, I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is the Iran War Today, the BBC's briefing about what's happened over the last 24 hours, bringing you right up to date with all you need to know about the US-Israel war with Iran. Let's start with some of today's key developments. The US sends a new aircraft carrier to the Middle East after families and lawmakers sound the alarm about conditions on board the USS Lincoln. Oil prices rise again after the US says it's capable of maintaining an indefinite naval blockade on Iran. How is all of this affecting support for Donald Trump? We visit the Tennessee munitions town that's loyal to the president but divided on Iran. As Iran grapples with a huge daily shortfall in petrol as consumption significantly outpaces domestic production. And the UN warns that Yemen is at risk of returning to full-scale civil war as it's drawn into the conflict between the US and Iran. The United States has deployed a new aircraft carrier to the Middle East as the war with Iran puts troops on the USS Abraham Lincoln under strain. Well, the Lincoln has been deployed for more than 9 months now, and in recent weeks, some families have voiced concerns about conditions on board, reports of food shortages, broken plumbing and exhaustion. US Democratic lawmakers have also been sounding the alarm.
I don't expect for an aircraft carrier to be the Holiday Inn, right? I don't expect for it to be a luxury lifestyle. Our Marines and our sailors, they are the best of the best. They sign up for hard duty, but we also should expect basic habitability. We should expect running water and clean drinking water, enough food to eat, working plumbing, the basics.
But Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth has called reports about the conditions on board completely misrepresented.
We make sure that every ship, every crew, every captain has everything we can provide them at every single moment.
And President Trump was asked about the situation as he boarded Air Force One. Take a listen.
That ship is moving right now, or very shortly, and it's being replaced with another very similar ship.
Has the deployment gone on too long?
No. Not nearly long enough. Thank you, everybody.
Well, let's speak to our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman. Hi, Tom. So just remind us what some of the conditions are, some of the issues that people are dealing with there.
Well, you have to remember these ships are like a floating military base. They have up to 5,000 sailors on board. They're absolutely vast. I mean, in the case of the Gerald R. Ford, which was the ship that was returned under similar circumstances with family members of crew really worried about deteriorating conditions, that is powered by nuclear propulsion, has up to something like 75 fighter jets on board, incredibly noisy, difficult, grinding conditions for these crews that serve on board them. And what we've had, as you've said, in the last few weeks is family members of sailors on board the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is based in San Diego, held a meeting with a senior Pentagon official and voiced concerns, particularly about deteriorating conditions, about the plumbing not working, about care packages and mail getting lost, about food supplies, and also this issue of deteriorating mental health because of the length of time this aircraft carrier has been at sea, 8.5 months and more than 200 days continuously at sea without a port stop, which is said to be a record for a US ship of this size. And the Navy Times, a magazine that covers all these issues, in the last few days had reported from family members that there have been up to 3 attempts by some sailors on board to jump overboard. Now, the US Navy has said that it hasn't detected any increased incidents of suicidal attempts. And you heard Pete Hegseth has really brushed aside all of this, as has Donald Trump. But I think it goes to show the way in which critics of the administration, Democrats, have written to the Pentagon now about this, saying this extended deployment from what they call the war of choice by Donald Trump has turned into chaos without an end game, now putting these huge, this huge strain on these aircraft carriers, these big beasts of the US Navy, the projection of American military power.
Yeah, the USS George Washington has now been deployed. What should we make of that?
Yeah, that news in the last day or so from US officials saying that the George Washington will now relieve the Abraham Lincoln. So I think that is an acknowledgement implicitly from the administration that there is an issue here. But I think if you look at the way President Trump has carried out military policy as part of his foreign policy over the last 7 or 8 months, you had the Gerald R. Ford, the world's biggest aircraft carrier, being deployed last year, first to the Mediterranean as part of its scheduled deployment, then pulled back to the Caribbean where these attacks on alleged drug boats were taking place. It took part in the raid that captured Nicolas Maduro. Then it was sent back to the Mediterranean as part of the attack on Iran, which all was planned and took place right at the very last minute, along with the Israelis. It had nearly a year at sea. I mean, that is near unprecedented, at least in the modern era. And then all these problems. It had a fire in the engine room, toilets breaking down, and all these other issues. So I think it is a signal or a sign of the way that Mr. Trump, as Commander-in-Chief, has been conducting warfare and foreign policy. And that is certainly why the Democrats, for example, are demanding answers. Richard Blumenthal, a former U.S. Marines Reserve, who serves in the Senate, has written to the Pentagon asking for a whole load of answers about all this, what is going on, and what it will mean for future deployments and where the US needs to have other capacity, for example, in the Indo-Pacific, putting a strain on the US's ability, as I say, to project itself globally.
Thank you, Tom. Well, oil prices have risen again after the US threatened an indefinite naval blockade and more economic pressure on Iran. Shipping traffic in the Strait of Hormuz has fallen below the month's average as both Tehran and Washington make competing claims over the strait. With me is Parham Gobadi from BBC Persian. So we have, as usual, differing accounts here of what's going on.
The American strategy seems to be shifting from bombing Iran into submission into exhausting Iran economically. So they've gone from military strikes, massive military campaigns, into putting economic pressure into Iran and changing it into a contest of endurance to see which side can endure more. Anyways, Iran does not want to give up its control over the Strait of Hormuz. It says it has managed the Strait of Hormuz, but the naval blockade that the U.S. has imposed on Iran is definitely inflicting pain on Iranian economy. And usually in these circumstances, ordinary Iranian people are bearing the brunt of that. Now, but also at the same time, Iranians are causing a lot of military-wise and also economically, costs on American military and economy. For example, today they said that Iranians managed to shut down MQ-9 Reaper drones. These are yesterday, Washington Post reported that 25 of them were shut down. Now, that is a quarter of the entire American fleet, and each one of them costs somewhere between $30 to $50 million. Now, compare that to Iranian Shahed drones that cost somewhere between $30, reportedly, to $50,000. So there is a huge difference in costs. Regarding costs. And against all this backdrop, one of the Iranian top generals on Iranian state TV said that Iran is changing its military doctrine from defensive to offensive. Now the question is, will Iran, in order to break that blockade, attack American assets in the region or not?
Okay, Parham, thank you for that. Back with you in just a moment. We're going to head to the US, though, because the war and its knock-on effects on everything from fuel to groceries has led to a steep decline in President Trump's approval ratings. Recent polling has placed his approval at an historic low, 33%, down 16 points from when he first took office, January 2025. Kingsport, Tennessee, is home to an ammunitions plant that manufactures explosives that the US military relies on. It's long been a Republican stronghold, and the BBC's been speaking to people there to see what they make of the war.
President Trump's approval ratings are down in recent polls. So I've come here to Kingsport, Tennessee, a working-class Appalachian town in a heavily red state that has voted Republican for more than 25 years. I'm here to ask voters and residents their feelings on the Iran war.
The conflict's justified.
I don't like the never-ending conflicts, but this isn't something new.
Honestly, I think we should turn them into a parking lot and don't worry about it anymore.
There's a lot of security There's the sign, Holston Army Ammunition Plant. Kingsport is home to many manufacturing and industrial operations, including one of America's major ammunitions plants, producing explosives for missiles, artillery, and other weaponry used by the U.S. military.
I'm all for going overseas and keeping it over there so it don't ever come here.
If they get a nuclear weapon, they're not like everybody else that has them. They get one, they're going to use it.
We've always been in the Middle East for how long? So it's not like a new situation.
We have no business in it.
Whether it was the Iran war or anything else, we're not going to control those gas prices.
To me, the most important thing when it comes to voting is affordability.
Homelessness, border security, the rights of minorities,
immigration.
When the president took office, he said he was going to get food prices down, but he has no control over that.
He's not put America first. He's put the war overseas first. He's got a lot of good ideas, but my biggest problem with him is humble yourself.
The majority of people here are white and they are Christian. And since our president that we have in office right now exercises those same beliefs, they kind of don't really feel the need to worry.
The people, I think they're still going to vote Republican. Being a Bible Belt, I don't think that's ever going to go away.
I voted for Donald Trump in this last election. I voted for him every time he's run. He's not a perfect man, but what would be the alternative?
Well, let's go back to Iran now. Petrol prices are a sensitive political issue there as the country grapples with a daily shortfall of around 14 million litres, adding pressure to the government's costly fuel subsidy programme. Iranian authorities have suspended a pilot scheme that would have sharply increased petrol prices for motorists exceeding a monthly fuel allowance. That scheme was halted just hours after it was announced. Well, with me again is Parham Gobadi from BBC Persian. So why is fuel and fuel prices such a sensitive issue in Iran?
There are two reasons. One is that economic reason, because Iran's the price of every litre of petrol in Iran is less than a cent. And it's been like that for many, many years right now. So many Iranians, they are used to that, and their economy, their livelihood is linked with the petrol, because if petrol prices go high, it means that many people work in Iranian online taxis to be able to make the ends meet. But if the prices go high, it also, there's a chain effect. There's a ripple effect that all the other things also, the prices will go high. But the most important reason is political, because back in November 2019, the government suddenly overnight increased the price of petrol, and then nationwide protests broke out in the country. And it was one of the most brutal crackdowns of the protests afterwards. So the Iranian authorities and the security establishment know that if they want to increase the price of petrol, it might lead and trigger another nationwide protest. That's why they piloted this scheme, and after a few hours, it had to come to a halt. So bottom line, petrol in Iran is not an economic commodity. It has become into a political red line, actually.
Okay. Thank you, Parham, as always. Now, the United Nations has warned that Yemen could return to full-scale civil war as it gets drawn into the confrontation between the US and Iran. UN Special Envoy said military activity had intensified between the Iranian-backed Houthi militia and forces loyal to the Saudi-backed government. Salit Nabil explains.
Fears are growing that Yemen might be back to a full-scale war between the Iranian-backed Houthi militants who control the capital Sana'a and the northern parts of Yemen on one hand, and the Yemeni government forces who are backed by Saudi Arabia and operate in the southern parts of the country. The UN has been warning that if this is to happen, humanitarian repercussions might get out of control. Both parties have been fighting each other since 2015, creating one of the worst humanitarian situations in the world and putting nearly half of the Yemeni population on the verge of starvation. But in 2022, the UN managed to broker a truce between both parties, but things have changed in recent weeks because the Houthis have been launching intensive airstrikes on government forces, especially in the city of Al-Makha, which has a strategic port that overlooks the Red Sea. And it is also close to the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, the southern entrance to the Red Sea. The Houthis say that this escalation comes in response to the blockade imposed by Saudi Arabia on Yemeni ports and airports since 2015. They have been attacking Saudi oil refineries recently to try and disrupt the oil production process in Saudi Arabia, which is a lifeline to the Saudi economy.
Thanks to Sally for that. Now, whether you are watching on YouTube, TikTok, or listening on Sounds, radio, or on TV, thanks for your time. We'll be back soon with the Iran War Today.